Hey, this is Phil Yanov, and this is the Modern Stoicism event. What is a Stoic response to the pandemic? We had Chris Gill, LeBon and Eve Riches each deliver about 10 minutes, as well as a panel Q&A where we took questions from the audience. And anyway, this is one of those events where the fates had their way, and we had a couple of technical kerfuffles right at the beginning of this thing, so we did not get the very beginning of Chris Gill's talk. So thank you. Welcome to the program. We're going to join Chris Gill in progress.
Taking reasonable safeguards, wearing masks when needed, maintaining social distance, and so on. And these are things that, in fact, if done by everyone, can have a decisive effect on keeping the virus under control, as has been shown many times around the world. On the other hand, we cannot, by our own unaided efforts as individuals, wholly control the spread of the virus in our own area or country, and we cannot on our own ensure that those we care for are not affected. And this can be, and is for many people, a cause of anxiety and distress. People want to have that control, they don't have it. So maintaining the dichotomy of control is the first step, I think, in Stoic practice, in ensuring that we play our part in helping to manage the situation without becoming prey to needless anxiety. Okay, so that's the first exercise. And then the second one that I think can be very helpful in the pandemic is Heracles' exercise on mapping and contracting the circles of our relationships. So just to read out Heracles' exercise, think of yourselves as being at the center of a series of relationships, your immediate family, most closely around you, then your extended family, then friends, neighbors, and work colleagues, members of the same neighborhood or organization, those living in the same city or region, members of the same nation, and then foreigners, including refugees and asylum seekers. Work, and here's the Stoic advice, work on trying to reduce the circles, giving to the outer circle the same importance and emotional weight you would give to the one just inside it. For instance, treat neighbors or work colleagues like friends or family members, and foreigners like fellow nationals. Okay, so why is this? This is a general exercise. It can be useful in all sorts of contexts. Well, why is it helpful or relevant in the pandemic? At a time when we're all forced to be more isolated from each other, it's helpful, first of all, because it provides a kind of mental map of our relationships and reminds us that we're connected with other people by different kinds of bond, even if we cannot see them in person. The relationships are still there. Also, the idea of contracting the circles of relationship, of bringing the circles closer in, is especially important now because the pandemic and lockdown has reminded us how much we all need other people to help us. Medical staff, delivery men and women, neighbors. It's also brought home to us that we can do more to help others, including neighbors or work colleagues, than we normally do or feel we need to do. We can treat them and should treat them more like friends or members of our family. So we're drawing in the circles. Also, more broadly, the pandemic has made us aware how much all human beings are interdependent in different parts of our countries and the world. Their behavior can affect whether we are more likely to get infected, and our actions can have the same effect on them. This exercise may also help us to take a more generous attitude to sharing the vaccines across the world and urging our governments to give funding for other poorer countries which cannot afford to buy the vaccines, bearing in mind the Stoic principle of the brotherhood and sisterhood of all human beings, wherever they are located in the world. So that's the second of the three exercises. The third one, the third Stoic exercise that can be helpful in the pandemic is adopting a view from above. imagining you see yourself from a cosmic viewpoint, or, and this is actually the case I'm going to look at, regarding yourself as an integral part of the natural world as a whole. And here's how Marcus Aurelius puts it. One should always keep in mind these things: what the nature of the whole is, and what my nature is, and how my nature is related to that of the whole, and what kind of part it is of what kind of whole. And bear in mind that no one can prevent me from always doing and saying what is in accordance with nature, of which I am a part. Now, although this exercise can be useful in various ways in helping us take a broad perspective on our lives, broader than a normally do, it can be especially useful, I think, in promoting a sense of environmental responsibility as regards our actions, and doing so even, or perhaps especially, under the pandemic. You might feel this is too much of a problem to worry about when we're already struggling with the pandemic and lockdown. We've got enough on our plate. But actually, this is a good time to be thinking about a problem that is potentially much more serious in its effects on humanity and nature than the pandemic. People's response to the pandemic have in some ways been beneficial for the environment, even if that wasn't their intention. People have shown that they can make big changes in their behavior, including cutting down on road and air travel, working from home, taking holidays and doing regular walks in their own locality instead of crossing the world to do that. And these are all things that can help and have helped to cut down on our carbon footprint and thus slow the rise in CO2 emissions and global warming that poses such a threat to us all. So in fact, this is an especially good time to think about ourselves as parts of the larger natural whole and to weigh up the effects of our actions on global warming, on nature as a whole, as well as on our fellow humans and ourselves. So these, I think, are three really valuable exercises, and I think there are three specific ways in which they can help us respond as Stoics to the pandemic. So I'll now hand over to Tim and Eve for their thoughts and drawing, no doubt, on their experience as therapists and mentors, which I don't have. Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Someone, by the way, I hope that you would take this as the compliment I'm sure it was meant to, that someone said in the chat room that they thought that perhaps you were the Attenborough of Stoicism. So that sounds like a pretty nice thing to say.
Fine. I'm happy to take that as a compliment.
Super. All right. I'm going to add Tim in, and I'm going to remove the spotlight from Chris so he can relax for a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, let's see now. Let me put this up so you can see it and make that a little bit bigger so we all see it. And this is Tim LeBon. And Tim, this is a real alphabet soup, but he's an accredited CBT therapist and registered psychotherapist. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Tim LeBon.
Thank you. Great to see everyone. And thanks, Chris, for your, as everly, scholarly and wise perspective. So look, I've been working actually from this very desk in the last year, seeing clients in the NHS doing CBT and clients, private clients using CBT and Stoicism. And I set myself the challenge, what are the Stoic responses that have been most helpful in practice? And you'll be very glad to know, and so will Chris, that the 5 top ones included the 3 that Chris has already mentioned, and 2 others. I'm not going to talk about the circles any more than Chris has, because I think he's going to talk more about their practical application. So I'm going to talk about these 2, and also Stoic therapy of emotions and virtue ethics and their practical application. So Chris has already told us about the dichotomy of control. And the question I asked myself is this going to be useful at a time when we have less control than usual? And the answer is absolutely yes. And some of you may have seen this before on social media. It became Someone shared it about a year ago, or I guess just over a year ago, and it became very popular. Not just, I think, because of this one about toilet paper. I think it actually seemed very relevant. So, what do the Stoics say? They say that we tend to care a lot about this stuff, which is the stuff on the outside, but it's largely outside our control, like the actions of others, what will happen. And so what we need to do is focus on what is under our control, which basically boils down to two things: our attitude and what we do. So when clients kind of were talking about this, I tended to do this exercise. And you start off with a blank piece of paper. Let me share it with you. And then you draw two columns: what I can't control and what I can control. And then I ask people to think of a particular issue that is of concern to you, like feeling taken advantage of at work. Now, what can you control and what can't you control in that instance? Well, you can't control what your boss asks you to do, but you can control how you respond. Does that make any sense? Well, a lot of people say it does. But then they can sometimes say, yeah, but isn't this going to be very passive? Isn't it going to make me something of a doormat? And the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely not. Because that is kind of cartoon stoicism, or kind of stiff upper lip stoicism. So just put up with it, which we put up on the initial questions, is not a proper Stoic response. And you can see that here, because one thing you control is how you respond. But this becomes even more clear when we see that Stoicism isn't just about the dichotomy of control, it's also about virtue ethics. Because Epictetus says, when anything happens to you, remember to turn to yourself and ask yourself what faculty you have to deal with it, which includes your ability to pick the right virtue. So look, these things, the virtues include courage and justice. So think about the last time you were courageous or just. Were you passive then, or were you actually quite active? Particularly bearing in mind that for the Stoics, justice is quite a broad notion, including kindness and compassion. So I'm going to share with you three broad types of cases where virtue ethics has been particularly handy over the last year. So one is the example I just gave about the employee who feels they're taken advantage of. Which virtues are going to be helpful for them? Well, possibly all of them, but particularly probably wisdom. Should they talk to their boss? How should they talk to them? And then courage to have that conversation. And of course, the other virtues could be relevant as well, because Stoics believe that we need all the virtues. Okay, second type of situation, and I wonder how many of you would share this concern, which is work-life balance. Anyone else? So I said I've been sitting in this chair a lot of the time during the pandemic, but I've tried to make sure I go out for walks, and this is something that the Stoics would endorse. So what virtues do we need? Well, wisdom, to understand that like a car in a way, if you don't refuel it, it's going to break down. And like us, if we don't give ourselves nourishment, rest, relaxation, we are going to break. And probably also moderation. So probably it's a good idea to set strict boundaries between work time and leisure time, especially when our office is also our living room. So the third type of difficulty that a lot of people have been telling me about are interpersonal difficulties. You know, you're stuck with the same person or group of people during lockdown, and that might not be what you wanted to do. It's not necessarily, that bit isn't necessarily under your control. But again, the virtues lens can be really helpful. Which virtues? Well, here often the first one to go for is justice, because paradoxically a bit, when we're annoyed with someone or angry, it's not the first thing we think of, but putting yourself in their position, seeing things from the other person's point of view is often very important. And then it kind of turns on the kind of kindness tap. But we also often need courage to approach them and talk about a difficulty we have if someone's irritating us, rather than just kind of ignore it. And wisdom, as always, to decide how best to tackle the issue, given what we know of the parties concerned. So virtue ethics has been really helpful. And so too has my third Stoic tool, which is the Stoic therapy of the emotions. So when Epictetus said, all those years ago, people are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things, little did he realize that 2,000 years later, psychologists would create cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and that would be something that would be provided these days on the NHS in the UK and help many people in many countries. So what do we do in CBT and indeed in Stoic therapy? Well, the idea is that if we notice our thinking, we can then change our thinking and then change how we feel. For example, and we talk about thinking traps in CBT. So for instance, one thinking trap is catastrophizing, like this will go on forever. Well, actually, it's not true. It won't go on forever. The vaccinations will reduce the R ratio and lockdowns will ease, hopefully actually end. So we teach people not to catastrophize. We teach them not to do all or nothing thinking, like, I can't do anything I want to. It's not true. But if we think that way, we're going to get very upset. But if we think in kind of shades of gray, we can say, I can go for a walk. I can connect with my friends. And the Stoic would add, I can develop my inner qualities, my virtues, my mindfulness. And it's very helpful to turn I can't do into I can do, as in a Hope video I created for the NHS, which was very much inspired by Stoicism, amongst other things. But the biggest thing I've been hearing from clients is it's Groundhog Day again. Anyone else feel that? Someone said they'd heard of a calendar which was created to be last year, February, March, because it was all the same. And weirdly, the actual film Groundhog Day, starring Andy McDowell and Bill Murray, actually has got a lot of Stoic wisdom. And also this particular therapy of the emotions. So the Bill Murray character, whose name is Phil, says to Rita, the Andy McDowell character, I'm living the same day over and over again, and it's a curse. And she says, I don't know, Phil, maybe it's not a curse. It just depends how you look at it. And that is Stoic therapy, of which Epictetus would have been proud. In the movie, it actually proves to be a game changer for Phil, because it changes not only how he feels, but what he does. So I do recommend watching Groundhog Day again, thinking about it in terms of Stoicism. And I've written an article about it, which you can have a look at if you like. But there's more, much more, because what I've described so far is pretty much standard conventional CBT. But from a Stoic perspective, there are other ideas we can take advantage of, which aren't available to the non-Stoic. And this includes the idea that a lot of the things that we want and can't have and get upset about would, from a Stoic perspective, be preferred indifference. They're nice to haves. They're not the thing that makes the difference between us leading a good life and being happy or being miserable or being a bad person. So what does make the difference is our character, our thoughts, how we manage our thoughts, and whether we're virtuous or not. And these are things that the government and the pandemic cannot take away from us. And in fact, we could say that the obstacle is the way. that actually these challenges give us an opportunity and a time to develop our virtues. If we agree with Marcus that very little is needed to make a happy life, it is all within yourself in your way of thinking. So I'm going to finish with the view from above, which Chris has already mentioned, and which Marcus Aurelius in particular also recommended. So the view from above, as if you're in outer space. Perspective shifting is something that conventional therapists will often use. They'll say things like, how would you think it's going to be important in 6 months' time? Or what does this situation look like from the other person's perspective? The view from above takes perspective shifting much further, asking questions like, what if we look at the whole of humanity right now, including people much less well off than us? What does that look like? What does our predicament look like when we think of it from the view from out of space? And not just looking at it from 6 months' time, but what does it look like from the perspective of the whole of time, from the beginning to the end of time? So, learning from the view from above. How can we learn from the view from above? Well, I'm going to finish with some ideas that some of my clients have come up with. So sometimes I've got a meditation of the view from above, which I sometimes talk through. I've got it recorded as well, and you can see the link to it there. And it can bring about some brilliant insights. And we're going to finish with these 4. There are others around me who are just like me. Everything is connected. I have choices, and there are consequences. What would I like to tell my grandchildren about the part I played during the great pandemic of 2020 to 2021? And to end on a positive note, before I hand over to Eve, like the seasons, everything passes, even a pandemic. Better times lie ahead. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So while I sort out my slides, I can share that I've been having a bit of a groundhog day myself, because I was doing a workshop this morning about the pandemic and anxiety, and I actually leant quite heavily on the dichotomy of control. And I want to just say I really agree with you about how important that's been for working with clients that are really struggling at this time. So hoping that my internet behaves itself, let me know if it doesn't. The thing that I wanted to talk about today is self-care during the pandemic, because I think for a lot of people, it's been a real struggle. When you think about it, there are so many factors in that. A lot of us, we're working from home or we're on furlough. So there's not that kind of accountability about you should be out of your pajamas by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or Pringles aren't a major food group. And on top of that, a lot of the things that we might have done that would have helped with anxiety have been removed, like you can't go to the gym or meet up with your friends. So you've got people stuck with this situation where they're feeling very bad about themselves. Their self-care might be deteriorating. And I had last week, over a 2-day period, there was 4 different people that all admitted to me that they weren't showering and they weren't going outside at all. And every time someone did that, they were saying it like they were the only person, and they were like, I've got this awful thing, like I can't tell you. And I was like, no, you're literally the 4th person today. And so I think there's a lot of guilt and shame going on top of everything. And then any problems that people had had before with their, self-care, like alcohol or food or whatever, has been exacerbated by the economic uncertainties and difficulties of the pandemic. So how can Stoicism help? I'm going to look at 3 things. One is temperance, another is oikeiosis, and the third one is cosmopolitanism. So let's have a look at temperance. I feel like it gets a raw deal sometimes because it sounds like it's not going to be any fun at all. So like Tim was saying, temperance is one of the virtues. So it's what makes up a good character, one of the things that makes up a good character. And it's all about acting with moderation, self-awareness, and self-control. And I think in modern life, we quite often understand self-control to be about relying on our willpower, which might work. I mean, it's immediately available. You can have an accountability buddy like, hey, see you in the online yoga class, and all that kind of thing. But as soon as we're under a lot of pressure, it takes mental effort to use pure willpower. And so it runs out. And then you find yourself in a kind of downward spiral of, oh no, everyone's saying online that they're doing dry January and veganuary and all those things. And you know, that they've taken up running or whatever. And here I am eating my Pringles in my PJs. And so there's like a downward spiral of shame and guilt. And so what can we do about that? So the thing we can do is connect with our values. And I think our values very naturally align with the virtues. And once we do that, it's so much easier to work on our self-care. I mean, my own example of this is I used to be a really heavy smoker. And I used to make a really terrible joke where I would say, oh, giving up smoking is easy. I've done it dozens of times. And actually, the time that I actually gave up smoking, I did a values clarification exercise. And I was thinking about how me smoking didn't align with my values. So my values in terms of acting with kindness to others. So being, you know, not putting pressure on the NHS or being a good teacher or a good mentor, a good parent, it didn't fit with being courageous. It didn't fit with wisdom, obviously. And when I really connected with that, I actually gave up smoking relatively easily. I don't want to boast about it because I always think never say never, but that was a lot of years ago. So that can make it so much easier than relying on just willpower. Now, one of the values that people might be able to connect with quite easily is caring for others. And we can connect this with a Stoic principle called oikeiosis. It's sometimes defined as appropriation or looking at what belongs to us, using the word caring as well, because it is part of that. And it has two strands. I'm hoping my internet is behaving itself because it's saying it's unstable. Sorry about that. Caring for yourself and caring for others. Now, both of those strands come from our nature. So they're both in our nature that we actually want to care for ourselves. It's self-preservation, and that we want to care for others because that's part of looking after our family. It's part of in our nature as animals that we want to care for others of our kind. And so when you think about it, if you're going to do those things, they're going to be mutually interdependent, because when we care for others, we have to care for ourselves first. If we don't care for ourselves first, we're not going to have the resource to care for others. When we provide that care, it helps us to build our relationships, and it helps us to feel good about ourselves because we're acting in accordance with virtues. So we feel the Stoics would say we would feel the emotion of joy because we're acting with virtue. So they're mutually independent. And it's going to start from the point of view of caring for yourself first in order to care for others. And so you've got that old phrase, I'm sure you've heard it used in this context, from the information you're given on the plane about put your own oxygen mask on first. If you don't care for yourself, you can't care for others. And so this can give you much more solid motivation to improve your self-care at this time. So what does that look like when we put it together with a couple of other concepts that Chris and Tim have been talking about? Well, we need to care for ourselves and care for others with all of the virtues. They're like four legs of a table. And if one of those legs is a bit wobbly or missing, it's going to fall over. So, for example, we can't care for others without temperance because we'd get worn out and burnt out, which I'm sure some of us can relate to during the pandemic. And we need to do it with wisdom, make sure we're not giving people care that they don't want or need. And we can also connect it to the circles of concern, because the urge to care for ourselves and to care for our immediate family, that's innate, that's genetic. But as we start to live a virtue-based life, then we're going to naturally start to extend that care to our community and even to the whole of humanity or to the whole of nature. So this relates to cosmopolitanism. And these are the circles of concern that they were talking about earlier, that we are a citizen of the world, we're all interconnected, and that we are sociable and capable of reason. So, for example, someone I was working with, they were really struggling with drinking too much during the pandemic. Their drinking had got a bit out of control, and they were using self-recrimination to try and deal with it. And it was actually making it worse. It's like pouring a petrol on a fire. And when we did a values clarification exercise and they were connecting with their values of wanting to be a good family member, wanting to be a helpful member of the community and not put pressure on the NHS, wanting to help humanity to get through the pandemic, that was a different position from which to find the courage to start to address their drinking and to get help with that, which was what they did. I was connecting it to something a little bit less dramatic with myself, because where I live, there's been some snow and ice, probably nothing compared to what some of you are used to. But for me, because I have a severe visual impairment, I have a paranoia that I'm going to fall over and smash my face or break an arm or something. And so I didn't want to leave the house. I guess Seneca was saying I was having a first movement of fear, and I've got all these thoughts like, you're going to break your teeth. And so I've tried to connect my daily exercise to nature. So, for example, I've got a little container of bird food. It's duck and swan food that I've been leaving the house with to go and do my duty of caring for nature and feeding the birds. And I can also connect me exercising with being a good teacher or a good parent or a good partner. Because if I'm taking good care of myself, I'm more able to show up in my duties and all of those roles. So I think what Marcus Aurelius is saying here is that when we look at all of our behavior, every single action, and that includes eating well, exercising, doing something to relax at the end of a busy day, then all of those things are contributing to the perfecting of social life. It's all part of our nature as a human to benefit others through our own behaviors. So how can we look at this in terms of, what are the overall takeaways? So my advice would be, if you can, there are lots of useful values clarification exercises online that you can have a go at, but look to the virtues and connect with those, because if you do that, it's going to make it so much easier for you to take good care of yourself. You have to remember to put on your own oxygen mask first, because without that, you can't care for others, because you won't have any resource to give if you're completely depleted. And that all of this is part of your very nature of what it is to be human, that you are sociable and that you are capable of acting with reason. And because of that, there is an ease to it. It has power behind it in a way that willpower doesn't. And so that was what I wanted to talk about today. I think my other takeaway would be, apparently don't feed ducks bread because it's bad for them. I've been going out with my little pot, and I went out the other day. There were no ducks, but some very grateful pigeons. So I'll buy that. I think that's good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think this is the part where we bring you all three to the stage, and there is a panel discussion component to this, right? So I'm going to add Tim, and I'm going to add Chris back to the front.
And if we can do the questions again, Phil.
All right. So then we'll do that. Let's see, we're going to continue because I'm going to clear those results. And there we go. Now let's ask the question after Eve and Tim and Chris presented some ideas to us. How do we feel about this now? What, if you pick 3 off this list, what are 3 things that you think are good Stoic responses? I don't see put your own oxygen mask on first as one of the choices, though, Eve. I think Tim has given you short shrift.
I've been ripped off.
Not exactly. Lots of answers coming in.
You can put in the chat ones that aren't on the list, as long as that doesn't involve Pringles.
Pringles really went off on a side thing there. I mean, the trying to figure out what sort of Pringles Marcus Aurelius would prefer. Because I remember that the virtues were number 1 before, and they are number 2 now.
I'm so pleased there's some oikiosis votes.
Yes.
I was trying to sell that idea.
Well, what's very impressive is that the 2 non-Stoic ones there have gone right down. So from just put up with it's gone down from 9 to 0. And enjoy the simple pleasures, which was very popular before 48, has gone down to 20. It's not the worst thing you can do, but it's not a particularly Stoic response. And as you said, oikiosis, well done, Eve, because that's gone up from 4 to 38. Dichotomy of control is still the winner. Virtue is still very popular. And the view from above also very popular. So that is fascinating.
I think you put a hard sell on it. Well done.
I think we're going to go straight into the questions, Phil. Yeah. I mean, we're going.
And we're going to take this close to the top of the hour, right? So thank you for everybody. If you've got more questions that you would like to stick in the chat, this is a good time to stick them in the chat so I could do that. And we've got some questions off of the board. Let me just start with one. And again, I'm going to take some of these questions and kind of pull them together. But, one of the things I think that we see, quite frankly, is that we're, we find ourselves dealing with difficult people and in lots of difficult situations, right? So there's a couple of things there, but I'm really trying to figure out how to maintain my equanimity. Chris, let me start with you on that. I mean, if I said to you, look, the thing I'm having trouble with is trying to figure out how do I deal with difficult people and not get riled about it myself. Where would you point me to first?
I think I would. Partly of the exit, the things I've just been talking about. I'd look at the circles of relationship, and say, well, where, how are you thinking about people? Are you thinking about them as in a sort of series of relationships, and can you do more about pulling them in? I think I'd ask also why are you finding people difficult? I mean, what is it that creates the difficulty? And here I think the Stoics remind us that what we can completely control is our own behavior. I think very often we find people troublesome because we want to control them. We want them to behave in the way we want them to behave. Well, actually, people don't. They make their own decisions. And I think accepting that everyone makes their own decisions and that they have to manage their own lives is actually a very useful first step, I think. And then you can go on to think about things like they're all part of the brotherhood of humankind and so on. Right. So how about that for a quick response?
No, I think it's that part of that, right? When we think about the things that we can control versus the things we can't, the things that we can control are inside of us, right? And so moving that center of control back into us instead of being outside, again, thinking that we have an operating manual for everybody else on the planet, that's not a good way for us to work on this, right? So bringing it into the center, that works really well. So one of the things are, we have people that believe, I want to go one step further with this. I want to go to Eve with this. One step further in this is that there's we do in fact have manuals for other people, and we're trying to think of, well, why do people feel differently than I do about, for example, the vaccine or wearing a mask? Or those are some of those very practical things that I might find myself having to deal with, where, what's inside of Stoicism is going to help me pull that back together, pull myself together, again, maintain my equanimity.
Well, it sounds a bit boring to say. I still feel like that's dichotomy of control at its heart, isn't it? Because the fact that people feel differently to you is not something that you're in control of. So all you can do is look at your own behavior and your own beliefs. And so I feel like that comes back to what Chris was just saying, that at the heart of that must be some concern that I should be able to make people think how I do. And it's not realistic, is it? That everyone will be doing their best, but some people will just be doing things wrong. And I think there's a big belief within Stoicism that when someone does something wrong, they're not doing it because they're trying to be deliberately bad on purpose. They actually believe that they're doing the right thing. They are just mistaken. And I think in the meditations, Marcus Aurelius reminds us of that over and over. People are doing things wrong. They're not doing it on purpose. They just don't understand. You might be able to talk to them about it, but actually you're not able to control their behavior. And
Right.
they're your brothers and sisters.
Right. I don't know. I find myself saying people like them do things like that, and just kind of that way I can push that over and say that's just the way that is. And I don't know if I feel better. I don't know if it's very stoic, but I'm trying. It does make me sort of feel better in that space.
Yeah. Do you think it's radical acceptance, isn't it? It's accepting what is. The fact is that there will be people during this pandemic who are going to behave in a really unwise way. And that accepting that reality rather than wishing for a reality that is different is really key, isn't it?
Yeah, I really do find myself again and again going back and reading Meditations, book 2, verse 1, certainly the most popular of all of those, right? But in that first piece, again and again, there are people, I'm going to meet them. They're going to be in all kinds of different places, and they just don't know any different. And I'm going to be virtuous myself. And that's how I kind of get myself put back into that, right?
And
Thank you.
For people
Tim,
that don't know the Meditations by Marcus very well, have a look at 2.1, where Marcus, it starts off, begin the day by saying to yourself, I shall meet with all kinds of people, the busybody, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, the unsocial. And it goes on to say exactly what Eve and Phil have been saying, that they do this because they just don't know any better. And then it goes on to say, we are made for cooperation. To act against one another is contrary to nature. So everybody, one takeaway from today, I hope, would be to just, you can Google it. You don't even have to buy a copy of it. Marcus Aurelius Meditations 2.1. And that has got so much wisdom just in one little meditation.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I keep it, certainly. I've got multiple copies and translations, as you probably do too. But one of the things I like about it is it's felt like Marcus was trying to make a laundry list here of all of the bad things, of all of the bad behaviors you might find. So I think it's okay in our modern terms. If you read this book, you understand it, you set it down and say, I think I understand this, to say, if he could have thought of other bad behaviors, he would have added those in as well. And so it might be the person who doesn't want to wear a mask, or the person who thinks I ought to be wearing 3, or whatever. He would have put all of those in there. He just ran out of room and time to pull that off. So I think that's great. Let me pivot you, Tim, into a question we got. How do you advise Stoics to manage grief during the pandemic? I just think there are so many opportunities for, I've certainly lost friends and friends of friends to this already. And we are sad at the opportunities that we've lost. We're not traveling. There's just so many levels of grief here. I want to know, what kind of advice do you think we should be taking?
The Stoicism can do many things. It can't stop these losses happening. That's something we can't control. We can control our response to it. And if we're human, we will feel sad, we will feel compassion. And Stoics aren't trying to stop that at all. So the idea that the Stoics are like statues or even like the very logical Mr. Spock, is not quite correct. We will be kind. We will be compassionate to these. If it's someone else that's lost someone, we will be kind to ourselves if it's ourselves. But what we won't do is we will not dwell on it too much. So in CBT we call this rumination, and obviously it's natural to ruminate about things when you've lost someone. But there'd be a distinction between helpful processing of grief, which might be talking about that person to other people, and honouring them. When an anniversary comes up, or in other ways, which is a very good thing. And then just going in your head, having that internal dialogue. Why did I say that mean thing to them? Why didn't I help them more? Which is very unhelpful. So that would be the beginning of my answer. I don't know if Eve or Chris would add.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think this is one of those areas where Stoicism gets misquoted, as if all the Stoics was saying, oh, everyone who's a real Stoic, if someone dies, you're just like over it immediately. And I think in some of, Seneca's work, where he's talking about grief, he's meaning people who after years are not moving on at all and are still ruminating about that same loss. It's not this idea that you don't have any emotions at all. So, yeah.
So it's okay to be sad when I'm a Stoic. It is okay to have grief when I'm Stoic. I mean, I was not unemotional, right? That's what we're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of those questions we have in the Stoic attitude and behavior scale, which is a whole list of questions which you can actually do in Stoic. We can see how Stoic you are. Is this difference between feeling sad and having uncontrollable grief? So the uncontrollable grief would be what I was talking about. This kind of rumination. Why didn't I do it differently? Why did this happen to me? That is not a Stoic response.
Right. Let's see. One more question, I think, and then I'll figure out where we're going to go from here. And I'm just going to kind of paraphrase something I'm seeing in the Q&A, which is this has been a time. The time of the pandemic has been a series of unexpected things and just a constant surprise, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it was bad. I didn't see this coming. And now I'm in lockdown and now I don't get to go do this. So set that aside. And then it's like, okay, well, now we have a vaccine and I feel pretty good about it. Oh my gosh, there's other strains coming. And oh, these people do you understand that there's this kind of thing? And the question is, how do I, as a Stoic, sitting in this moment, in this time, I'm looking at you, Chris Gill, how do I, in this moment, in this time, not worry about what's coming next, right? How do I pull myself into this moment?
I think one exercise we haven't talked about, is this idea of wishing with reservation. That I want something to happen if nothing prevents it. I want to get, I want the vaccine to work for me if nothing prevents it. It's a way of, it's a kind of maneuver that tries to help you do what we've been talking about repeatedly, which is to stop ourselves trying to control things that we can't control. So I think that's another kind of, that's something else we can draw on, wishing with reservation.
That's such a good thing, isn't it? I messed up with that once during the pandemic really badly when I thought I was going to see my daughter at Christmas and I didn't build in any sort of reserve clause. I totally did the non-Stoic thing, set my heart on it, and then was really upset when it was cancelled. And it just really brought home to me, never forget the reserve clause, try and say, if fate allows, such is going to happen. It makes such a difference, doesn't it?
And what we seem to forget as we pass through life is that life is a perpetual business of adaptation to what is in front of us now. I mean, the idea that what the pandemic has brought home to us is precisely this vulnerability. But this vulnerability is there all the time. We all find ourselves in unexpected situations. Okay, there are more unexpected situations, but it has just underlined to us something that is really there all the time. And it doesn't go away with the passage of time and getting older. You may, on the other hand, on the contrary, you're likely to experience more unexpected things as you get older.
Yeah. I think that this is one of the ways that people kind of confuse capital S Stoicism with little s Stoicism, right? I mean, they kind of get it wrapped in it. And first off is to say that, yes, I am going to have the reserve clause, right, which has become Deo Volente or Fortuna Volente. I don't know. But it'd be, if the fates are willing, right, if the fates allow. And it comes up here in the chat is to say, how do I keep this from just keeping me from doing anything, right? I'm just not going to take action because, I don't know, why should I do anything? Why should I respond?
Well, but then the virtues come in, don't they? Then we get back to what Tim has stressed. That's the primary thing we should be trying to do. We use our agency to act on the virtues. In the process of that, we may encounter difficulties and obstacles, and that's where the reserve can come in. So the reserve thing isn't sort of the primary thing, but it's a useful resource for helping us try to exercise the virtues in a sensible way.
Would that link to the Stoic Archer as well, that you can aim to achieve things and do things as much as you can, but it's a moving target because things are changing throughout the pandemic?
Yes. The wind blows. We can aim at the target, but the wind may blow. And the wind, I'm afraid, does blow for all of us in different ways.
So we do the best we can.
Yes.
And sometimes it goes wrong.
That's
so we try again.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
Do everything within our power, but our power is limited.
Yeah, and of course I think about that, right? The archer metaphor, right? The whole idea of I'm pulling the bow. I've practiced. I've got the best bow I can have. I have got the best arrow. I am trained. But when I let go of it, then the fates are going to do with that arrow what they will. As you point out, the wind may blow, right? And that might be what happens there. And tomorrow I will, again, I think of this in this situation of, well, what about tomorrow? And I'm worried about that. It's like, well, tomorrow I will do the same thing. I will be the archer. I will have a good bow. I will do all that. And I will release the arrow. And it might work and it might not. But I've done my part, right? I've done my practice. There's so much more I would love to talk with you all about. And I think the audience feels the same way. But we said we were going to do this for an hour, and then we would let them go home. So they've got other things to do. And I know that, it's kind of like middle of the day. I got more that I can do today, but you might, be kind of done with the day where you guys are. But I wanted to say thank you all to Tim and Chris and Eve for doing this, and for Modern Stoicism for putting it here and making this possible. And of course, the Aurelius Foundation for providing us a platform on which we could stand and talk, a little perch to have this conversation with. We got caught up in a couple of things. So let me just tell you, our lovely audience, we have got a lot more coming up. The thing that you may not have seen yet is we're going to do something for the Marcus Aurelius' birthday in April. And in May, we've got Stoicon X Military. And in June, we have got Stoicon X Women. So we've got 3 big events coming up, and we still haven't planned Stoicon 2021 yet. So, and that's the big show, of course, Stoic Week and all of those things that Tim and Chris have been doing for years. But I'll tell you what, we'll do this. I'll send you a link. We got an email address for you. I'll send you an email, and we'll remind you of the things that we've got coming up. But again, thanks. I don't know how many of you do this. I do a lot of Zoom calls, and because we've got you all muted, we can't. Actually, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Before we all go, I'm going to let you say thank you to the audience. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. And everybody can simply unmute and say thank you on your way out the door. How about that?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Wash your hands.
I love this. I love this. What a great audience.